Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: Europe cannot defend itself without US, says NATO. Why has China removed its highest-ranked military general? South Sudan crisis heightens risk of mass violence against civilians. Investment bubble warning around AI deals. And France, Egypt join push for youth social media ban. Starting with politics, why has China removed its highest-ranked military general? The purging of China's top general Zhang Yuxia has left questions about what triggered the elite power struggle and what this means for China's war-fighting capacity, including any ambitions for Taiwan. Zhang, 75, was vice-chairman of the Central Military Commission, the Communist Party group headed by the country's leader Xi Jinping, which controls the armed forces. The CMC, usually made up of around 7 people, has now been reduced to just 2 members, Xi and Genjiang Shengmin. Russia withdrawing troops from airport in northeast Syria. Russia is moving to end its military presence in a corner of the country where the Damascus government is trying to take control from Kurdish forces. Russia has stationed forces at Qamishli Airport in the northeast since 2019, a relatively small deployment compared to its air base, and a naval facility on Syria's Mediterranean coast, both of which it is expected to maintain. Europe cannot defend itself without US, says NATO chief. Amid calls for the continent to stand on its own feet following tensions over Greenland, Mark Rutte said EU countries would have to double defence spending from the 5% NATO target agreed last year to 10% and spend billions and billions on building nuclear arms. Iran's shadow fleet is fueling the Myanmar junta's air war. Iran has secretly shipped vast amounts of jet fuel to Myanmar's military. As the junta ramps up bombing raids against civilian targets, Iran is now the military's primary supplier of jet fuel and urea, which is an ingredient in Myanmar's munitions. The deliveries violate Western sanctions on both countries. Nigerian officers to face trial over coup plot allegations. The group of 16 officers are set to face a military court after being accused of plotting to overthrow the government of President Tinubu last year. Moving to stories in conflict, South Sudan crisis heightens the risk of mass violence against civilians. Citing fresh clashes and inflammatory rhetoric, the UN Commission on Human Rights said it was gravely alarmed by fighting in Jonglei State, where witnesses reported civilians fleeing into nearby swamps. Scrutiny of Iran crackdown as NGO puts death toll past 5,000. The UN voted to expand its investigation into Iran's crackdown on protests that killed thousands, including children, extending mandates to gather evidence and press for accountability. Tehran denounced the move as politicized. US to step up coordination with Nigeria to pursue Islamic State militants. It is part of a wider bid to pursue IS group-linked militants on the African continent. The Pentagon is also maintaining lines of communication with militaries in the West African countries of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Israel recovers last hostage body from Gaza. The remains of police officer Ran Grilli, held in Gaza for more than 840 days, have been identified and will be returned for burial. The recovery of the remains could pave the way for a limited reopening of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, the enclave's main gateway to the outside world. How Soviet urban planning is helping Russia freeze Ukraine. With January temperatures falling below -15°C, Russia has been attacking energy infrastructure, leaving about 1 million Ukrainians without heating. What is making things much worse for Ukraine and easier for Russia is the widespread prevalence of apartment blocks that rely on communal central heating, where water is heated up elsewhere and then pumped into their radiators. Targeted by Russian forces, Ukraine says that all such power plants have now been hit. India's sales of treasuries deepen pivot from USD asset ESA. India's holdings of US treasuries have fallen to a 5-year low as the nation pushes to support its currency and diversify its reserves, joining a broader shift by some major economies out of the world's biggest bond market. The country's holdings of long-term US debt have dropped to $174 billion, down 26% from a 2023 peak. Moving to stories in economics. Gold rises past $5,100 to record high on safe haven rush. The historic rally comes amid rising geopolitical uncertainties. The metal rose 64% in 2025, its biggest annual gain since 1979, driven by safe haven demand, U.S. monetary policy easing, robust central bank purchases including China's 14th straight month of buying in December, and record inflows into exchange-traded funds. Warning over investment bubble around circular AI deals. NVIDIA, the dominant maker of artificial intelligence chips and primary force behind what critics are calling a potential bubble, has been propelling the AI industry by partnering with and heavily investing in its own customers. The world's most valuable company has pledged tens of billions of dollars toward AI companies that use its chips and is funding new infrastructure critical to sustaining demand for its products, the latest being a $2 billion investment in cloud computing firm and key customer CoreWeave. TikTok access confirmed after new ownership deal. The Chinese parent company of TikTok secured a deal that lets the popular video app remain in use in the US. ByteDance retains a stake in the new US joint venture, as well as control of several revenue streams, while offloading the potentially dicey burden of data policing onto Oracle. India's sales of treasuries deepen pivot from USD assets. India's holdings of US treasuries have fallen to a 5-year low as the nation pushes to support its currency and diversify its reserves, joining a broader shift by some major economies out of the world's biggest bond market. The country's holdings of long-term US debt have dropped to $174 billion, down 26% from a 2023 peak. US government invests $1.6 billion for stake in rare earths firm. The agreement with USA Rare Earth, which controls deposits of so-called heavy rare earths that are often used for defense technologies, said the investment will fund mining, processing, metal making and magnet manufacturing. It's the latest push to reduce China's dominance over the rare earth sector. Now for news in development. Solar and wind overtake fossil fuels in the EU for the first time. Wind and solar generated more EU electricity than fossil fuels for the first time in 2025, marking a milestone in the transition to clean power. However, experts warn the EU's outdated grid is still holding back progress. Latin America rides out trade storm with help from China. Argentina said its shipments abroad last year were the second highest in its history. Brazil and Chile also reported that exports hit records in 2025. Exporters are benefiting from improved logistics, the ability to redirect shipments toward emerging markets, and deeper ties with China, which is importing the region's commodity exports, such as soybeans, copper, and iron ore. US completes withdrawal from World Health Organization. The US owes more than $130 million to the Global Health Agency, according to WHO. The withdrawal could reportedly impact the global response to new outbreaks and the ability of US scientists and pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines and medicines against new threats. Ivory Coast cocoa farmers have nobody to sell to. The West African country home to thousands of smallholder cocoa farmers who are the backbone of the world's largest producer of the fruit. But the country currently faces major difficulties in selling its cocoa, hit by a slowdown in exports amid buyers' liquidity problems and a drop in global prices. In its last report on the sector in 2019, the World Bank estimated that more than half of cocoa producers lived on less than $1.36 a day. How Slovakia became the world's #1 car maker. Slovakia, which is home to 5.4 million people, makes almost 1 million cars a year. This is a small number compared to the world's largest producers, such as the biggest, China, which manufactures 31 million cars per annum, yet Slovakia is the #1 producer on a per capita basis, relative to the size of its population. Finally, our social news. World not ready for rise in extreme heat, scientists say. Nearly 3.8 billion people could face extreme heat by 2050, and while tropical countries will bear the brunt, cooler regions will also need to adapt, scientists said. Demand for cooling will significantly increase in giant countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and Nigeria, where hundreds of millions of people lack air conditioning or other means of beating the heat. But even a moderate increase in hotter days could have a severe impact in nations not used to such conditions like Canada, Russia, and Finland. France approves banning under-15s from social media. President Macron has pointed to social media as one factor to blame for violence among young people and is urging France to follow Australia, whose world-first ban for under-16s on social media platforms, including Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube, came into force in December. The French bill proposes banning under-15s from social networks and social networking functionalities, while Egypt's parliament is also looking at ways to regulate children's use of social media platforms. Drug makers turn to AI to speed trials, regulatory submissions. Artificial intelligence has yet to deliver on the most challenging aspect of drug development, finding new molecules that lead to major medical advances, but it is already streamlining less glamorous parts of the process. AI is helping find participants and sites for clinical trials and drafting documents for regulators, shaving weeks off these labor-intensive processes. Scientists recover the oldest wooden tools from a site in Greece. 2 artifacts found at a lakeshore in the Megalopolis Basin are the oldest wooden tools to be uncovered so far and date back 430,000 years. One is a spindly stick about 80 centimeters long that could have been used for digging in the mud. The other is a smaller, more mysterious handheld chunk of willow or poplar wood that may have been used to shape stone tools. New map of far-off galaxies may help understand mysterious dark matter. Dark matter doesn't absorb or give off light, so scientists can't study it directly. But they can observe how its gravity warps and bends the star stuff around it. And by studying these distortions across large swathes of the universe, scientists can get closer to unmasking dark matter and its various hiding places. The latest map, created with images from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, is the most detailed yet over such a large patch of sky, at twice the resolution of previous attempts, and captures hundreds of thousands of galaxies over the past 10 billion years. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.